I've said this before, and I think it bears repeating. There's something about the Star Wars franchise that has not lent itself to moving past the legacy of the original trilogy in some form. Even long before Disney purchased Lucasfilm, the prequel trilogy, which began in 1999 with The Phantom Menace. These were written and directed by George Lucas, and these being prequels, of course, were obviously tied into the original trilogy, and I have to confess, I didn't really like them. I know a lot of people look back at these films saying how much better they were compared to the sequel trilogy that came later, and I get it. However, I don't think that's a high bar of comparison. I found the prequels to be a bit cartoonish, maybe a little childish in terms of dialogue and characterization at times. And there was some good stuff in there as well, for sure, but they simply lacked the depth and maturity and impact of the iconic original trilogy. And of course, it's true that there really hadn't been anything like the original films when they first came out. A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi were cinematic epics made all the more significant by the fact that there had been nothing like them at that stage. But prequels of some sort have been the order of the day for this franchise. Clone Wars, Rogue One, a Star Wars story, Solo, a Star Wars story, various TV series. There's so many of them now. And even though the franchise did chronologically move forward in time with the sequel movies, let's be honest, their stories heavily relied upon and related to past events, specifically the original trilogy. I mean, Force Awakens felt like a bit of a remake of A New Hope, but with new characters. Nostalgia for the original films has manifested in this franchise, be it through direct prequels or sequels that somehow connect back to the original film stories. There's always a member-berry element or two to new Star Wars productions. Now, as a point of comparison, Star Trek as a franchise has had its fair share of prequels as well. And I think that's most unfortunate because prequels, generally speaking, are unwanted by fans, especially when there's too many of them. The 4 years of Enterprise was more than enough prequel Trek action in my opinion, even though that show could have benefited from a fifth and final season. Nevertheless, Star Trek's move towards more and more prequels really demonstrated a failure of imagination in my opinion. The Kelvin timeline movies, Star Trek Discovery, Strange New Worlds, etc. Again, it's all stuck in the past, looking back, and to make matters worse, those productions are poorly executed. However, for the most part, Star Trek has proven to be, for whatever reason, more versatile than Star Wars. It's just the nature of the beast. Star Trek was capable of moving past the original series and reinventing itself, visually, tonally, and of course, telling different kinds of stories thanks to the fact that it's an episodic, weekly TV format. By comparison to Star Wars, Star Trek's movies were never as successful financially. Star Trek was more of a TV-centric franchise. Star Wars is a bit more constrained in its storytelling. That's not a criticism. It's not even a bad thing necessarily. Star Wars does what Star Wars does very well, and my comparison to Star Trek is not meant as trying to say one is better than the other. That's a subjective thing. It's that Star Wars fans have particular expectations as to what story elements, tropes, themes, and content they want to see in a Star Wars movie. Having said that, I think something like Solo, a Star Wars story, tried to do something a little bit different. It wasn't a Jedi/Force-centric story, so it was a departure despite being yet another prequel and not a particularly good film. The premise wasn't bad, however, execution was lacking. But having said that, if you decouple too many core elements from Star Wars, if you omit the Jedi, lightsabers, the Force, the Sith, the Empire, the Rebels, etc., if you take out too much, it stops feeling like a Star Wars film. However, I still think interesting stories could be told about characters in the Star Wars universe despite not having many of those elements. But I think the reason why Star Trek can tell more types of stories and occasionally creatively deviate more than Star Wars can was quite simply because Star Trek was a TV-based franchise. You can do a Western-type episode one week, a holodeck story the next, a dark horror story, you can do a time travel story, you can do a lighthearted episode, a courtroom drama, a moral conundrum episode, you can do a romance, and then the next week you can do a really dry, cerebral sci-fi story. So when you're making episodic television with more than 20 episodes per year, you can have much more variance and you can take more risks. And then you can just revert back to hard sci-fi the next week. But because Star Wars is an expensive movie franchise, and they only make movies occasionally, the studio can't afford to take too many risks like that. The films cost a fortune to make, and so in order to ensure profitability, they have to make sure they offer fans a consistent product that ticks the boxes that fans expect to see. So risks become dangerous because risks mean potential financial failure. So in order to try to guarantee a hit, a lot of Star Wars productions try to leverage the memory of the original better films in some way, with references or nods to characters or story threads that link back to those movies. Member berries, in other words. Now, neither franchise has been immune from the message, which has been inserted in some way, shape, or form in recent productions from both franchises. But I get the sense and the feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong here, in my opinion, Star Wars fans do seem to be more unhappy with the direction of their franchise than Star Trek fans. Maybe it's about the same, but I think Star Wars just edges it in that respect. Now, as an example of yet more inability for Star Wars to move past its past, it looks like we're getting yet another prequel. This one is set much further back in time. This article is from Screen Rant. Star Wars producer gives intriguing new name to Jedi origin movie set 25,000 years in the past. Star Wars producer Simon Emanuel has just introduced a fascinating new name for the upcoming Star Wars movie originally thought to be titled Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi, which could signal a thrilling change. As one of the most exciting projects on the list of Star Wars upcoming movies, Dawn of the Jedi was billed as a story set 25,000 years before the prequel trilogy, making it easily the earliest project in the Star Wars timeline among all Star Wars movies and TV shows. However, updates on Dawn of Jedi have been minimal. Now, Star Wars producer Simon Emanuel has just used a new title for Dawn of the Jedi that could reveal what's to come. In an interview with SFX magazine, Roberts said, James Mangold's Jedi Prime is set thousands and thousands of years before the original trilogy, and I'm really excited to see what happens there. The full article is linked below for you to read. Now, I'm sure there's lots of Star Wars fans who can't wait to see a movie like this, but again, it's yet another prequel. I'm also very concerned about prequels because they can potentially undermine certain aspects of established canon and lore, if not done right. But putting that aside, what do you think about this? Should Star Wars be exploring its past in this way? I ask this because I think some things should remain a mystery. We don't need the mythology of the Jedi to be completely unpacked and deconstructed and explained in detail, do we? I prefer when things are left to the imagination, and it can therefore make it more meaningful and powerful by keeping that mystery in place. I mean, look at how the mystery of the Doctor on Doctor Who was completely destroyed in the Timeless Children episode by explaining how he came into being and the origin of the Time Lords, a mystery that didn't need to be explained. Let the fans use their imaginations. Some things are better left unexplained. So let me know what you guys think about this. Do you prefer when Star Wars is moving forward into the future, or when it's stuck navel-gazing and nostalgia-baiting into its past? Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.